Snow fell sideways that evening, flung by the wind as if the sky were emptying its grief upon the land. The world outside Sophia May Thornton's cabin had turned white and wild, every ridge and pine buried beneath layers of silence. Inside, the woman moved like someone half-dreaming, her shawl pulled tight, her face lit by a single lantern. She had been alone for 4 winters now, so long that the sound of her own breath sometimes startled her. The fire popped, a sharp reminder that wood was running low. She set down her needlework, rose stiffly, and went to the door. The axe leaned against the frame, its handle polished by habit. Sophia stepped out into the snow, the wind striking her face with frozen needles. Each swing of the axe echoed into the valley, like the heartbeat of a place long deserted. Her husband's grave was somewhere under the drifts behind the barn. She never looked that way after dusk. Tonight, though, something made her glance toward it. The sense of a shape, or perhaps only memory, crouched among the pines. Nothing moved. She swallowed hard, turned back, and carried the logs inside. When she shut the door, the storm's howl softened to a muffled hum. The cabin smelled of pine pitch and lard, the way it always had when Samuel was alive. She knelt by the hearth, fed the fire, and whispered to it like a friend who never answered. Outside, the night thickened. Then came the first knock. It wasn't loud, just a dull thud against the wood. Sophia froze, her breath caught halfway in her throat. Another came, gentler, and then a voice, low, roughened by cold. Please. Her first thought was bandits. The sheriff had told her last autumn to keep the rifle loaded. She reached for it now, hands trembling. Who's there? She called. A pause. Wind moaned through the cracks. Then the same voice, strained but clear. My father, he's old. We need fire. Sophia's heart pounded. The lantern's flame fluttered as if listening. Through the window's frost, she could just make out 2 shapes. One tall and broad, the other bent, half collapsed against him. The taller figure's hair was black and long, whipping in the wind. Apache. The word came like a memory of every warning she'd ever heard in town. Widow Thornton lives too far out. Someday they'll come for her. She stared at the latch. The storm screamed, battering the walls like fists. Then she saw the old man's hand slip from the younger's shoulder and vanish into the snow. She dropped the rifle. The door opened with a cry of hinges, and the wind burst through, carrying the 2 men with it. The tall one nearly stumbled as he guided his father inside. Snow clung to their hair and skin. The elder's lips were blue. His breath came shallow, almost gone. Set him near the fire, Sophia said quickly, her voice steadier than she felt. The younger man obeyed without a word, kneeling to ease his father down by the hearth. His shoulders were bare beneath a torn blanket. Muscles quivered from cold, but his eyes stayed calm, dark as wet stone. She moved around them, lighting another lamp, fetching the old quilt from her cot. The elder's hands were rough and brown, his veins swollen, his face carved by age and weather. Sophia pressed a warm cloth to his forehead, and felt how fragile life could be. The young man spoke softly in Apache, then turned to her. He will die if cold stays. He won't, she said, forcing authority she didn't believe. We'll get him warm. For a time, there was only the crackle of fire, and the faint wheeze of the old man's breathing. Snow hissed against the window panes, but inside the air thickened with heat and tension. Sophia watched the stranger's face as the flames danced across it. Sharp jaw, scar at his collarbone, lashes heavy with melting ice. His silence unnerved her more than words might have. When she brought him a cup of hot water, he bowed his head in quiet thanks, not touching her eyes. She noticed then how his hands trembled. Not from fear, but exhaustion. What's your name? She asked after a long while. Tayan, he said carefully. My father, Nantan. She nodded, the name strange on her tongue yet soft as prayer. I'm Sophia. He repeated it under his breath, as if testing the sound. As the night deepened, she caught herself studying him. How he adjusted the logs to keep the heat even, how he shielded his father's body from drafts with his own. There was reverence in every movement, something that spoke of duty rather than desperation. When she offered him the last crust of bread, he broke it in 2 and gave the larger piece to Nantan. The old man smiled faintly, murmured something, and drifted into sleep. Sophia sat across the room, her hands folded, pretending to sew though the needle never moved. She could feel the storm pressing on the cabin walls like a living thing, testing their strength. The only light came from the fire and the lantern between them, haloing the room in gold. "You live here alone?" Tayan asked quietly. She hesitated. 4 years now." His gaze didn't pry, but something in it saw more than she said. He looked toward the door, where the snow piled high, then back at her. "Long time," he murmured. "Long enough," she replied. They said no more after that. Words seemed too heavy, too easily broken in the air between them. Yet something shifted, quiet and undeniable, like ice cracking far beneath the river's surface. At one point she caught him glancing toward the mantel where Samuel's rifle hung. His expression was unreadable, perhaps recognition, perhaps sorrow. He turned away, eyes lowering to the flames. When the elder stirred again, coughing weakly, Sophia knelt beside him with the cup. "Drink," she whispered. He obeyed, and when she looked up, Tayan's gaze met hers. Gratitude shimmered there, but deeper still was something she couldn't name, a trust born not of choice but of necessity. She looked away, pretending to tend the fire. "You can stay till morning," she said. Tayan nodded. "When Storm sleeps, we go." He stretched a blanket near the hearth, making space for his father. Sophia returned to her chair, exhaustion wrapping around her like fog. Outside, the wind softened. The world seemed to hold its breath. For the first time in years, she didn't dread the sound of breathing beside her. She dreamed lightly, half aware of the storm fading. Somewhere in the night, Nantan murmured in his own tongue, and Tayan whispered a reply that sounded like song. Sophia's eyes opened once. Through the haze, she saw him watching the fire, his profile cut against its light. There was strength there, but also something wounded, something older than either of them could mend. By dawn, the snow had buried her fence posts, and the storm had eased into a soft, endless fall. Sophia stirred awake to the sound of movement. Tayan stepping outside, bare-chested still, into the morning's white silence. She rose quickly, pulling her shawl tight, and followed to the door. He stood in the yard, the wind tugging at his hair, gathering fallen branches. The sight stopped her cold. This stranger, after nearly freezing to death, was cutting wood for her, piling it neatly by the wall. She opened her mouth to protest but couldn't. Her throat tightened, an ache she hadn't felt since before the grave on the hill froze over. When he returned inside, cheeks flushed from the cold, he said nothing. He simply nodded to her, as if to say the world owed them no words. She nodded back, unable to speak. The fire crackled between them again, fuller now. Nantan slept, his breathing stronger. Snow light filled the cabin, soft and pure. Sophia sat slowly, hands folded in her lap, and felt a strange warmth rise inside her, a trembling recognition that her solitude had been broken not by noise or pity, but by need. And yet, as she watched the steam curl from the kettle and the wind die against the window, another thought crept quietly through her chest. When the storm ended they would leave, and she would be alone again. She looked at the door and listened to the faint howl beyond, wondering if the wind carried prayers or warnings. Outside, unseen by her, fresh tracks led from the tree line toward the road. 3 sets, faint but certain. Someone had been watching the cabin during the night. The snow kept falling, soft and endless, as Sophia turned back to the fire, unaware that the storm had brought more than just 2 strangers to her door. Morning broke pale and trembling over the hills, the storm's fury replaced by a silence so deep it seemed carved from glass. Inside the cabin, the fire burned low but steady, painting the walls in strokes of amber. Sophia stirred from her chair, her neck stiff, the wool shawl slipped to the floor. Across the room, Tayan knelt beside his father, pressing a damp cloth to the old man's brow. His movements were precise, reverent, hands like carved stone softened by care. Nantan's breath came slow, but no longer rattled. Sophia watched as Tayan adjusted the blanket, his bare shoulders glistening faintly in the half-light. She had not seen such tenderness in years. It felt almost indecent, like glimpsing a prayer not meant for human eyes. She rose quietly, poured water into the kettle, and set it over the flame. He should drink soon, she said, her voice a murmur. Tayan nodded once, not looking up. He say your fire is kind. The words hung in the air, fragile and strange. She wasn't sure if she should smile or weep. Instead, she busied herself with the coffee, grounding beans between two stones, listening to their scrape echo through the stillness. When she handed him a tin cup, their fingers brushed. His skin was warm, despite the cold. "Thank you," he said softly. The English was careful, each syllable weighed like an offering. They drank in silence, the only sound the pop of sap in the flames. The storm outside had left the world buried and motionless, as if time itself had chosen to rest. Later, when Nantan dozed again, Tayan rose and went to the door. "Snow deep," he murmured, pushing it open. Light spilled in, blinding, endless white. The drifts reached halfway up the fence, glittering like crushed glass. Sophia stood beside him, the chill cutting through her thin dress. "You won't get far today," she said. His gaze swept the horizon, then returned to her. "We wait." Something in the way he said it, steady, patient, almost like a promise, unsettled her more than the storm itself. She nodded, retreating to the hearth. He took up her axe without asking, stepped outside, and began to split logs. The sound of it, clean, rhythmic, filled the valley. Each strike echoed through her bones. She watched from the window, saw the steam rise from his skin, the effortless strength in his arms. It had been years since another human presence moved in her yard, years since any sound other than her own breath or the wind filled the air. By midday, the woodpile had doubled. He came back in, shaking snow from his hair. "For fire," he said simply. She tried to thank him, but the words tangled in her throat. Instead, she ladled broth into 2 bowls and placed one before him. He hesitated, waiting until she took her first spoonful before tasting his. The gesture, small, polite, instinctive, pierced her more deeply than any kindness she could recall. "You could have gone south," she said after a time. "Warmer lands." He looked into the bowl, then met her eyes. "My father want to see snow again before he go to spirits." Sophia's spoon stilled. "He's dying." Tayan nodded. "He know. I know." The fire cracked between them. Outside, the wind carried faint cries of wolves echoing across the valley. She felt a chill crawl up her spine. "Those beasts," she whispered. Tayan stood, his expression unreadable. He reached for the door, but she caught his arm. "Don't," she said sharply. "They'll tear you apart." He looked at her hand on his skin, then at her face. "They hungry," he said calmly, "but not brave." He opened the door anyway and stepped into the blue dusk. Sophia stood frozen, the cold rushing in around her like breath from another world. Through the slats she saw him vanish into the snow, only the faint gleam of movement in the whiteness. The howls grew louder, then one barked cry cut short. Silence. Her pulse thudded. She grabbed the rifle but couldn't make her legs move. A shadow appeared through the drift, Tayan, re-entering quietly, wiping frost from his hair. No blood. Only calm. "Gone," he said simply, setting the bar back on the door. She stared at him, astonished. "You're mad." He met her gaze, unflinching. "You safe." Something in his tone left no room for argument. He walked past her, crouched by the fire, and warmed his hands as if nothing had happened. Sophia set the rifle aside and leaned against the wall, her breath uneven. The world felt rearranged, its boundaries shifted, its rules rewritten. When night came, the 3 of them ate quietly. Nantan woke enough to smile faintly at her, muttering something that made Tayan chuckle softly. "He say you cook like woman from his village long ago." "Tell him she must have been desperate too," she replied with a dry smile. Tayan translated, and Nantan laughed, a weak, rattling sound that somehow made the room warmer. Later, Sophia mended her torn sleeve by the firelight, while Tayan carved a piece of cedar into a small shape. The air between them was thick with unspoken things: gratitude, suspicion, the fragile piece of necessity. When she finally asked what he was carving, he held it up, a bird, wings folded. "For my father," he said. "He forgets dreams when storm long." It's beautiful, she murmured. He shrugged lightly. Would remember hands that made it. The phrase lingered in her chest long after he set the carving down. She found herself studying him again. The quiet control in his posture, the sadness buried beneath it. There was strength there, yes, but also the kind of fatigue only years of exile could bring. She wondered if he saw the same in her. When she rose to refill the kettle, her legs brushed against the quilt that had slipped from Nanton's shoulder. She stooped to pull it up, and Tayan's hand joined hers. Their fingers met, just for an instant. The air changed. Slow, electric, wordless. He withdrew first, bowing his head slightly in apology. She turned away, pretending to stir the coals. Outside, snow began again, soft flakes drifting past the window. You said town's near? He asked after a while. 3 miles east, she said. They don't like strangers. He looked into the fire. Or you? The question caught her off guard. No, she said finally. They don't like reminders. He waited, but she said no more. When Nantan began coughing again, Tayan knelt beside him, murmuring low words in Apache until the sound eased. The old man drifted back to sleep, a faint smile on his lips. Sophia stood nearby, watching them, something tightening in her throat. You love him, she whispered, half to herself. Tayan glanced up, eyes glinting in the firelight. He is my heart. She turned away quickly, afraid he might see the wet shimmer in her own eyes. Hours later, when she finally lay down, she could not sleep. The wind had softened to a whisper, but her heart kept its own uneasy rhythm. The presence of another heartbeat in the room, two in fact, felt foreign, both comfort and threat. She opened her eyes once and saw him sitting against the far wall, the knife in his lap, gaze on the flames. Watching, guarding. His silhouette flickered, half shadow, half light. For a long moment, she thought of calling his name, saying something ordinary, anything human. But she didn't. The words felt too dangerous. Instead, she let her eyes close and listened to the fire's breathing. Outside, beyond the hills, faint lights moved through the night. 3 riders tracing the trail toward her cabin, their torches small against the snow. Inside, unaware, Tayan turned his head toward the window, as if some instinct had stirred. His eyes narrowed slightly. Then he looked back to the fire and waited for morning. The morning sun rose pale and cold, a washed coin over a landscape still wounded by snow. Sophia stood at the window, her breath ghosting against the glass. The world outside glittered with silence, the kind that comes after a storm. But beneath it, something uneasy stirred. Tayan was outside, feeding the mare that had wandered from her pen days before, his figure dark against the white. The sight should have brought her calm. Instead, she felt the old ache of fear return, the one that whispered she'd let the world inside again. Behind her, Nantan coughed weakly. She went to him at once, placing a steadying hand on his shoulder. His skin burned under her palm. The fever had grown through the night. You should rest, she said softly, dampening a cloth and pressing it to his brow. Tayan stepped in a moment later, snow melting from his hair. He worse, he said quietly, eyes on his father. Sophia nodded. We'll need willow bark from the creek. It's good for fever. I will go. The water's frozen, she warned. You'll need an axe. He gave a faint smile, the first she'd seen. I know cold better than most. She didn't stop him. He wrapped a strip of fur around his hands and slipped out into the light, leaving the cabin filled with the soft rhythm of Nanton's breathing. Sophia watched him go until he disappeared behind the rise, the air so clear she could hear each crunch of his boots fading into distance. When he returned, his hands were raw and bleeding from the ice, but he carried the bark. She boiled it quickly, stirring the bitter scent into the air. Nantan drank without protest, though his eyes wandered. He said something in Apache, words that sounded like a farewell. Tayan sat beside him, murmuring back. His face stayed calm, but his throat moved with the effort not to break. Sophia looked away, pretending to tend the fire. Later, as they worked in silence, the crunch of hooves outside froze them both. Tayan's head lifted sharply. Sophia's stomach turned to ice. A knock came, firm and deliberate. She opened the door to find Sheriff Amos Crowley, his coat dusted with frost, 2 men behind him. He squinted past her shoulder into the room. "Morning, Sophia. You got company, I hear." Her mouth went dry. "If you came for gossip, Sheriff, you've ridden too far." He chuckled, though there was no warmth in it. "Words all over town. Widow Thornton's shelterin' Apaches. That true?" She held her ground. "They're people, same as you and me. The older one's sick." His eyes narrowed. "Don't much matter. You know the laws. Harborin' savages could bring trouble on all of us." From behind her, Tayan stepped into view. He didn't move quickly, but the room seemed to shrink around his presence. Bare-chested still, scarred shoulders gleaming in the firelight, he looked like a man carved from the land itself. Amos's hand drifted to his pistol. "You best stay put, boy." Tayan's voice came calm and low. "No fight here." Sophia stepped between them. "He's unarmed. Doesn't take a weapon to cause trouble." Amos spat into the snow. "The folks in town are nervous. They'll want answers. You think you can hide him out here forever?" She folded her arms. "I didn't ask permission to show mercy." The sheriff's expression hardened. "Mercy's fine until it burns the rest of us." He tipped his hat. "You've till tomorrow to send him off your land. After that, I come back with men who don't ask twice." He turned and mounted his horse. The men followed, leaving hoofprints that carved through the snow like threats. Sophia stood in the doorway long after they'd vanished. Inside, Tayan said nothing. He returned to his father's side, checking the fever again. His calm unnerved her. Too steady, too resigned. "They won't understand," she said finally. "Not them." He looked up, meeting her gaze. "They fear what they never sat beside." Her throat tightened. "You should go before they return." "My father cannot." "Then I'll speak for you." He frowned. "They listen to you?" She hesitated, a bitter smile tugging at her mouth. "They never did before. Maybe that's what makes me dangerous." Through the afternoon, she prepared broth and gathered what medicine she had left. The fever eased slightly, but Nantan drifted in and out of dreams, whispering names neither of them understood. When she wiped his brow, he reached for her wrist and murmured something soft. Tayan translated, voice trembling. "He says your soul carries light. He says it frightens the dark." Sophia blinked hard, pretending to adjust the quilt. "He's delirious." Tayan only shook his head. "He knows truth when close to death." As twilight fell, the cabin glowed golden against the blue snow. Sophia felt the world outside press closer, the whisper of judgment circling like wolves. In her mind she heard Mrs. Gentry's voice from years ago. "That woman don't belong in decent company. Always thought herself above or below everyone else." Now she'd given them reason. When she stepped outside for air, the cold bit her lungs. She saw tracks leading from the trees toward the road. Fresh ones. Not from the sheriff this time. Someone had come close again. Watching. She turned quickly back inside, bolting the door. "You keep the fire low," she said. "If they see light, they'll come sooner." Tayan nodded, moving to shutter the windows. The two of them worked in quiet rhythm, hands brushing once as they reached for the same latch. Neither drew back. He looked at her then, not with hunger, but with something deeper, the recognition of another exile. "You stay here alone," he said softly. "Why?" She thought of the grave under the hill, of the neighbors who had crossed the road to avoid her shadow. "Because it hurts less to be lonely by choice," she said. His eyes held hers, and in that silence, she knew he understood. Night deepened. The wind changed, carrying the faint jingle of harness metal. Tayan stiffened, listening. Sophia's pulse quickened. She put out the lamp. Through a slit in the shutter, torchlight flickered on the ridge. 3 riders, moving slow. "They came early," she whispered. He nodded once, then turned to her, voice firm but gentle. "If they come, you stand back." "I speak." "No," she said fiercely. "If they see you step out, they'll shoot." His jaw clenched. "Then we hide like thieves?" "Like people who want to live." He looked at her a long moment, then lowered his gaze. I bring danger. You brought warmth, she said quietly. Let's not trade one for the other yet. The riders didn't approach that night, only circled the ridge, leaving their shadows on the snow. But the fear stayed. Nantan woke again near midnight, reaching for his son. His lips moved soundlessly, and Tayan knelt close, listening. Then he turned to Sophia. He say he see his mother in the fire. She waits. Sophia's chest tightened. He's slipping. Tayan touched his father's face, his expression unreadable. When sun comes, we bury him or we carry him. Both hard. Sophia placed her hand on his shoulder. Then you're not doing it alone. He looked up, and for a moment their faces were inches apart. The air between them trembled. His breath smelled of smoke and cold air. She saw the grief in his eyes, raw, ancient, and something inside her ached to reach for it. But she didn't. Instead, she drew back and said, Rest. You'll need strength. He nodded, folding himself beside the hearth. She sat opposite him, both staring at the flames, each pretending not to feel what had already begun. Outside, the first gray hint of dawn brushed the horizon. Then came the distant crack of a rifle. One shot, echoing off the valley walls. Sophia's head snapped toward the window, heart pounding. Tayan was already on his feet, silent, alert. He moved to the door, peering through the gap. Nothing but snow and light. But the smoke from a torch still hung in the distance, thin, accusing, drifting toward her cabin like a warning that the quiet would not last. Dawn came like a bruise across the horizon, violet light bleeding over the snowfields. Sophia woke to stillness so deep it hurt. The fire had gone to embers, and her hands were stiff with cold. Nantan lay quiet by the hearth, his chest barely rising. Tayan sat beside him, his head bowed, whispering words she couldn't understand. The air was heavy, thick with farewell. She crossed the room and knelt beside them. He's gone. Tayan shook his head. Not yet. His eyes were red, not from tears but from sleeplessness. He waits for light. Sophia touched Nantan's arm, and his eyes fluttered open one last time. A faint smile ghosted his lips. He murmured something weakly, voice thin as breath. Tayan translated, voice cracking. He say, thank you for giving him peace. The old man exhaled, a sound softer than snow landing on snow. Then there was nothing. The silence afterward felt endless. Tayan bowed low, pressing his forehead to his father's still hand. Sophia turned away, her own throat burning. Outside, the light grew, the color of pale honey spilling over the land. Hours later, she watched him dig through the frozen ground, each strike of the shovel a slow act of devotion. He worked barehanded when the blade stuck, blood marking the snow like red petals. Sophia carried blankets and wood to the grave, saying nothing. When it was done, he laid his father down and covered him carefully, smoothing the mound with both palms. They stood together for a long time beneath the skeletal pines. The wind sighed through the branches like the voice of the world itself. When they returned to the cabin, Sophia brewed coffee and poured it into 2 cups. He drank without speaking, his eyes distant, untethered. He was ready, she said softly. Yes, he whispered. But I am not. The words fell heavy between them. She wanted to say something kind, something to bridge that quiet grief, but before she could, hoofbeats echoed from beyond the ridge. Tayan's head snapped up. Sophia ran to the window. Figures moved across the snow, 3 riders, rifles glinting in the morning sun. They came, she murmured. He rose slowly, calm again, the way water hardens when it freezes. I speak, he said. She turned sharply. No. They'll shoot before you finish a word. His gaze softened. You protect me once. Now I protect you. Before she could stop him, he took his father's blanket from the floor and stepped into the blinding light. Sophia followed, heart hammering. The riders approached, led by Sheriff Amos. His horse snorted clouds of steam. I gave you time, Sophia. You didn't listen. He's done nothing wrong, she said, voice steady though her hands shook. His father's dead. They're leaving. Amos's eyes narrowed. Too late. The town's angry. They think you've turned against your own. The two men behind him cocked their rifles. Tayan stood silent, his bare chest rising and falling like the slow rhythm of a drum. He's unarmed, Sophia said. You'll fire on a man who buried his father in frozen ground? One of the riders sneered. Buried him or hid him. Who's to say there ain't more of 'em in those hills? Tayan stepped forward, raising both hands. We come in peace. We hurt no one. Don't take another step, Amos barked. The sound cracked the air like thunder. Snow shifted from the trees, falling in pale sheets. Sophia felt something inside her break. She moved before she could think, stepping in front of Tayan, her shawl whipping in the wind. You'll shoot me first, she said. Amos stared, jaw tight. Don't make this harder than it is. It's already hard, she replied. For once in your life, Amos, do something decent. Let this man go. His face twisted, torn between pride and doubt. The wind howled around them, a storm's ghost returning for its final say. Tayan stood still as stone. Only his eyes moved, watching her. For the first time, she saw something fierce in them. Fear, not for himself but for her. You don't have to, he murmured. Yes, I do, she said, not looking back. Because you remind me what I almost forgot. And what is that? That mercy's the last thing worth saving. Amos lowered his weapon a fraction. The men behind him hesitated, glancing at one another. A long moment passed, the kind where whole lives turn quietly. Finally, the sheriff sighed, the fight draining from his voice. You're a damn fool, Sophia. The both of you. He holstered his gun. You want to keep your company, do it. But if anything happens out here, it's on your head. He turned his horse, muttering to his men. They rode off, their silhouettes shrinking into the snow until only the wind remained. Sophia's knees nearly gave out, but Tayan caught her before she fell. His hands were warm on her arms, steady, grounding. For a moment, neither spoke. You stood for me, he said quietly. She looked up, her eyes wet. No. I stood for what's right. He nodded, but something in his gaze said he knew it was both. They went back inside, shutting the door against the wind. The fire was low again. She fed it fresh wood. He sat near it, staring into the flames as if they held his father's face. After a while, he spoke. I must go when sun high. I bury father, then walk south. There is land there for our people. She felt the ache return, that old hollow of loss, but now sharper because it wasn't emptiness, it was attachment. You'll die out there, she said. No shelter for days. He smiled faintly. Then maybe the snow keep me. She shook her head. Stay. At least till the thaw. His hand touched his chest, then hers, a gesture soft and deliberate. Your kindness is more than a man should ask. Her throat closed. It isn't kindness, she whispered. It's company. For the first time, his expression broke into something close to warmth, a flicker of sunlight through winter branches. They sat together till afternoon, listening to the fire breathe. The storm had passed completely now, leaving the world washed clean. Through the window, sunlight danced on the snow, too bright to look at. When he finally stood, she rose with him. I'll come with you to the hill, she said. He hesitated, then nodded. Together they walked through the drifts to the grave. He placed a small cedar carving atop the mound, the bird he'd whittled by the fire. He flies now, he murmured. Sophia's voice shook. And you? He turned toward her, his face solemn, wind tangling his hair. Maybe I stay. Just until the snow forgets his name. She smiled through the ache. Then you'll be here a while. They walked back slowly, the horizon glowing gold where the sun touched the mountains. When they reached the cabin door, he stopped and looked once more at the grave. Then he whispered something in his language, a farewell or a prayer, she couldn't tell which. Inside, the fire crackled again, alive and steady. And for the first time in years, Sophia realized the silence in her cabin no longer sounded like loneliness. Outside, far beyond the hills, the sheriff's riders paused at the ridge, watching the smoke rise from her chimney, a thin, defiant thread against the white sky.